All right, welcome to another episode of Ex-Vicarious. I'm Braith, and today I'm joined by Ryan Van. Ryan's actually featured on Ex-Vicarious before in the Q&A, but for those who haven't read it, Ryan's currently building at Earlywork, Australia's first tech sales school. After doing sales for Sydney FC during uni, he started an awesome blog and podcast of his own called The Marketing Insider. While he was interviewing marketing leaders each week, he was also fulfilling all the marketing demands at startups, including Lawpath, Safety Culture, and Steppen, which he helped go from 0 to 1. And interestingly enough, Ryan's just come back from DEF CON 1. Alright, so I spent a lot of sleepless nights thinking, how do I become the best version of myself and leave my mark on the world? To answer this, I decided to ask exceptional people who have or are on the journey of doing just that. When you have big dreams, it's easy to just fantasize about them and live vicariously through your idols. But that's not how I want to live. So if you feel the same way, this podcast will show you how to make your dreams look more like goals by showing you how founders, creators, and game changers did it. You'll learn about their habits, mindsets, and strategies so you can stop dreaming and start dream making. I'm Braith, and this is Ex-Vicarious. Ryan, mate, welcome to the podcast. How's the US and Europe?
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me. No, it was good. It was good like everyone else in Australia. Just went away during the winter and went to the Northern Hemisphere for summer. But no, it was good fun. Feeling nice, rested and recharged as well. And mate, ready to go and get back into things. Plenty happening at Earlywork as well.
Yeah, because I know before you left, actually, when we caught up, you said you like to work in really high intensity sprints and then taking that time off always helps you recharge. Is it more so just an energy recharge, or would you say there's some sort of creativity that comes back, especially after you go on a trip where you're traveling around the world?
Yeah, it's mostly two things. It's mostly two things, I think. Like one is just around, I actually don't know from an energy recharge standpoint, if it's actually like physically at least that helpful. I think certainly from a mental perspective, it is quite helpful. I think just being able to detach from the like hustle and bustle of that like 9 to 5. And I quite enjoy like having basically when I'm at home, like I'm pretty like structured and pretty routine in how I operate. But it's always a good reminder when I go overseas that there are different ways of living life and there are different things out there. And so you don't necessarily need these things and a lot of things that you tend to do just like overcomplicate as well, like your day-to-day life. And I think the other one is I just love traveling now, meeting new people, going to new places, experiencing new things. And it just grants me like newer perspective on different things that like one I can bring back into the work sense as well, like being able to take that step back as well is very helpful. But I think just from a general life perspective as well, it's like something that I, at least just being in my early 20s, it's something that I really value at this current point in time, just meeting new people, learning more about their experiences as well too. So yeah, for me, it's like both of those, I think a bit more of a mental reset, mental recharge as well, and you stop yourself getting like really burnt out if you're working hard. And then there's the other piece, which is just new perspectives, being able to take a step back and really assess from like a life standpoint, like business standpoint, where are you feeling and go from there. But no, it's overall like really good fun.
Yeah, so just coming back this time, is there anything that you're thinking of implementing now just in your day-to-day life? You said some ways you might interpret things differently or think about things differently. Is there anything you've been thinking about implementing?
Yeah, yeah. To not sound like a complete like super saiyan robot, like I'll give something like a little bit more like casual or like more simple that I'm like
Yeah.
implementing. So when I was overseas, I stayed in the Netherlands with one of my friends who's like originally from the Netherlands and lives there now. But I met him 2 years ago when I was overseas, and so went to live with him for a week. And for that whole week in the morning and like when we were getting around, we were just riding like bikes everywhere.
Yeah.
And it's even if it was like a very short 10-minute walk, like you'd still just get the bike there. It was very normalized to ride the bike as well. And I just found that, especially in the morning, you go, it's quite nice. After dinner, you go, you like ride the bike back as well. And you don't have to go like super hard or push super hard. And so something like more tactically that like I've been implementing a lot more recently is actually just in my like daily commute, putting in more like bike rides in, because before I used to just like train on the bike and then the only time I'd ride it would really be like when I'm training or sometime that's like more competitive, like during a longer race where that's the only thing. But what I found is why not just start like habit stacking that onto an existing routine, existing habits. So for kind of the last 2 weeks, I've just been like riding out to my local train station, which would be like a 25-minute walk Or now it's like a 5-10 minute ride out, and then got like a locker there and everything. And it's just like a nice sort of reset, like a good change up from like the routine perspective to bring back. Plenty of other things, but that's like a very small thing that the culture obviously in the Netherlands is like pretty different to overall. I'd say like pretty good fun as well as a small thing there. But if I just hadn't had like that circuit breaker of my routine, I probably would still be doing the exact same thing now. But I just think from a quality of life standpoint, it's so good to just be like explore. Maybe I'll explore like a new route home or whatever. Like
Yeah.
maybe I'll take something different as well too. So yeah.
Yeah, and I do love last time I was in Japan, that's when I did a lot of bike riding everywhere in Osaka.
Mm.
And yeah, like I definitely wanted to see that be available in Sydney. Basically, you could walk 2 minutes in any direction and there's a bike there. And it only costs, I don't know, about $5 per month to use unlimited. That would be crazy if they had that in Australia because it's so
Yeah.
enjoyable, it feels safe. And as you said,
But
just doing it from a more leisurely standpoint, finding a new route home, it's quite definitely very enjoyable. I think that's
yeah,
cool.
like
Yeah, really cool that you brought that back here.
yeah, no, I think the big one is literally just. I think now also I'm a lot more like vigilant. I feel before I used to be like, oh, Sydney, like the urban planning, the infrastructure is like so bad for all this stuff. But now I'm like, when I was overseas, like I started, looking up like different routes, etc., that I could use because like when I'm at home, I don't need to do that. Like I can just use the same ones off the top of my head. And so the last few weekends, I've just been going on longer rides or like longer runs and just in like new routes. And then there's so many different like cycleways or just like shared pathways in Sydney that like I just literally didn't know about as well.
Right.
And it's almost like coming back to Sydney and you're like being like the same tourist sort of mindset as well, I think has been like just a good refresher thing that I've like really taken back.
By not actively looking for those routes because we live in Sydney, I guess you do find a lot less of it here unless you actually look for it. Yeah, I'll ask you for some of those routes after this. But the other thing you mentioned was the habit stacking. So just for people who haven't heard of that, would you be able to go into habit stacking a little bit and some of the other practices of habit stacking that you've implemented that have really helped you?
Yeah, the concept of habit stacking, I believe, is from Atomic Habits. I
Yeah.
can't remember because I read it a little bit a while back, but effectively it says that the easiest way to form a new habit is to attach it to something two ways, right? To attach it and put it on top of something you do already, or just like replace like an existing habit that you have versus trying to reinvent the wheel as well. And that's the quickest way of doing so. From a habit stacking perspective, like the thing that most people would probably want to look at is like your morning routine and what are things that you do within that. Like a very tactical one, for instance, is if you want to start getting better at content creation, if you work full time, like every single morning at probably the exact same time, like you will be commuting. Like you will be, that's like a habit as well. It's like you catch the 7:10 a.m. train in, or like you catch the 7:20 a.m. bus in, and there's like a 20-minute interval. Habit stacking effectively says, okay, cool, like you do that on the commute. Now, instead of just going on Instagram for 20 minutes, maybe you want to get into content creation. Maybe you just write like a LinkedIn post. You write up some content ideas in that 20 minutes of the habit that you're doing. Maybe you want to get more fit and like more active. It's okay. Maybe you do some like training planning as well of like different workouts that you can do. And so that's something that I've been like applying a lot more, and like slowly over time, you just add on a lot more different things, like add on a lot more different like habits as well over time. And yeah, like I literally did that for content creation, like the back end of 2023, like I set myself the goal of posting 5 times a week on LinkedIn for about 2 or 3 months. And the best way I found to do that was just like, I just write my LinkedIn post, for a week in advance, just on the bus in the morning. And I was doing that like already as a thing. So that's a pretty good example of habit stacking. Because I think what's hard is when you go, oh, okay, I need to like make this, I want to do something new, but like, oh, like I just don't have the time. Like I just don't have the time to carve it out. And especially when you're not good at something, you don't necessarily enjoy it as much. And if you don't enjoy it as much, you don't get the good feedback loop to keep coming back to that. And so with that in mind, effectively, like by putting it with something that you already do, it makes the cognitive sort of workload on your brain just be like a lot more relaxed as well. And you're like, okay, I can just do this. And then as you improving and improving, it's like you break that out as a separate habit as well. So yeah, that's like a pretty good example of habit stacking. Like what you don't want to do is just randomly set yourself the goal of I want to wake up at like 6 a.m. every morning, but then you've like never woken up at 6 a.m. in your life before. It's like you just wake up maybe for 2 days and you're like, okay, this is like not happening. It's like you need to slowly Gradually build up to that as well too.
Yeah, the gradual build-up's a huge one, and yeah, that was an awesome breakdown. Shout out James Clear. I'll put the book as well in the show notes for people to find later if they want to read a bit more into it. But yeah, that like for me, habit stacking has really helped as well personally. Just a small one I do is I wanted to be doing push-ups every single day, and then I was like, what do I do every single morning while I brush my teeth? It's something I can't not do. So I was like attached it to that and just made it so every time I
Mm.
brush my teeth, I have to do push-ups afterwards. And to implement something like that, like it might even be better to do the push-ups beforehand because then you're not allowed to brush your teeth until you've done push-ups,
Yeah,
and
exactly.
it's going to feel disgusting not to brush your teeth. So it's like something you just force yourself into doing it. And on certain days, if you're really tired from the night before, really sore from doing other activity, it gets easy, as you said, because there's that really low cognitive load since it's something that's just habitual, something that you do. So yeah, if you guys just find anything that you're bound to do every single morning, as Ryan said, for example, the commute to work, and you just implement something that you want to be doing every day into that thing that you already do, then naturally you're going to be doing it every day since it's attached to something that's already part of your life. But yeah, I wanted to move on to Cal Newport actually. And because I know you're a huge fan of his and the way you perceive passion is largely influenced by his book, So Good They Can't Ignore You. So for those who aren't familiar, can you briefly explain what passion means to you and how you have found yours?
Yeah, I'd highly recommend actually reading the book as well. It's like probably my I'm not a big book reader or like a big super long form like writing reader as well, but I would like highly recommend checking that book out if you're feeling a little bit lost from like a career standpoint. For me, I read it when I was like 1 or 2 years in and trying to pick like a longer term direction. I had done a few things and I think it was very clarifying as well. Getting back to the question directly, I think my main takeaway effectively from the book is that I think a lot of society's perception of like careers is that you almost it's like you spend your whole life effectively trying to find yourself. It's like you're born with a predestined like thing, like a role or like a type of company that you're like meant to do. And it's like your whole time on the earth is effectively meant to be trying to find that thing. And the key takeaway that I took away from, and the thing is basically described as like your passion effectively is like subconsciously what people are saying. What the book basically says is like flips it on its head. And the main sort of takeaway that I have is with your career or just like in life in general, it's not necessarily about finding yourself, it's about making yourself. And it's a very useful mindset shift because when you're always aspiring towards something, there's like the hedonic treadmill, like you'll never really like ever be like content or satisfied with something as well. And so tying that back to passion, like at least for me, I think passion is something that just comes with two things, right? Like one is competence with something, and then the second one is just like time doing it as well. Passion doesn't necessarily mean you're like good at that thing either, but relative to other people, it just means you've done it a lot. You perceive yourself as I'm somewhat okay at this. And so from a passion perspective, and I always, as like my number one bit of like career advice that I always give to people when I talk to them at unis, talk to them at work, is always just that sense of uncertain about like your future path. I actually see that as like a good thing as well. It's like embrace that uncertainty and just like really just follow your curiosity at that current point in time. Like the only time where you're really truly like falling behind in your life or you're falling behind in your career is like when you're not doing things. Like when you just accept that I am like this, or I'm just never going to find my thing, or I don't want to meet new people. That is the only time that you really fall behind in life. And that's like my perspective as well. And so even for where I'm at from a career standpoint, right? If you had asked me even 3 years ago if I would be where I am now, like absolutely not. I like have always just applied that same curiosity mindset. So when 2019, I started uni, I was really curious, for instance, about like investment banking as like a pathway. But I relentlessly just like chased that down and like actually questioned whether or not that's something that I wanted to do. Figured that it really wasn't. And then because of that, I took a couple months off university basically to follow different curiosities in like marketing, sales, and like the world of tech wasn't even on my radar as well. And even the role of marketing slash like growth, which I would say is my like passion from like a skill set standpoint, was not like a passion back then. If someone had told me to follow my passion, like marketing would not have been like on that radar. Now, there were ingredients in my past that would have led me to that conclusion, but that's just very like revisionist history, right?
Mm.
And so the main thing there is, okay, like I had these curiosities in sales and marketing. Like I worked in door-to-door sales for a bit, worked in telesales for a bit, and I found that, okay, sales probably isn't the long-term career path, but I get like the actual opportunity like of that, at least outside of tech. And then I stumbled into the marketing space because of a friend's referral to a different internship. And I just was, okay, this feels directionally correct. But what I'm going to do is I'm just going to keep being curious and keep testing out different things, keep learning about different things. And over time, I'd say my passion for the skill set has evolved as I feel as though, like I perceive I've definitely spent the last 3-4 years in it. And then secondly, like I perceive myself as having gotten like better at that. And so it's almost reframing passion as like an end state. And it's not something you're born with, but it's something that you just develop over time. But the way that you do that is you have this mindset of you are not predetermined to be someone. You can determine who you want to be as well. And that's like my perspective. And there's obviously a bunch of different factors that go into that around how you're raised and like the ability to even get to that point of self-actualization and sort of the resources that you have at your disposal too. But I'd say if you are in a fortunate enough position where you have the time to actually think a bit more critically about your career, like your parents don't rely on you for an income, like you can think more about like critically for yourself about what do you actually want. It's like that mindset of just like embracing the uncertainty that's sort of coming with that, like seeing that as like a good thing, but then you just need to do something about it as well. Do something
Yeah.
about it, follow what you're curious about, read up more on that, go message people in the industry to meet with them, start your own side projects that help you learn more about that space, do some courses that will help you learn more about that space, and chase that curiosity down because you just always regret the inaction more than the actual action itself.
Yeah, 100%. Like any actions that you can do to get you towards where you think you're going to be interested in, yeah, as you said, it's the best thing you can do because you either find out that you are really passionate about it or you find out that you may want to find something else. And I wanted to ask if you, let's say for the younger people out there who are pretty early on in their careers, if they're really certain about their passion in a career sense without having any experience in that yet, would you say that is quite a dangerous mindset to have?
Yeah, like, well, funnily enough, that was actually me probably when I graduated high school in 2018. I would truly, it's very like a career decision at the end of the day is like a practical one and not a theoretical one. And so if you're basing what is really like a practical decision based on theory, like I would contend that, and this is advice I give myself like what, 5-6 years ago now, like I would contend that's actually not something, you're not giving yourself like the full picture basically to make that decision.
Mm.
So I'd really question like where that passion comes from. And realistically, I think a lot of this stuff from a career standpoint has to be like intrinsic. And if you're really asking yourself, why am I like, for instance, investment banking? It's like, for me, I was like rubbish at maths, like all throughout school. Like I hated everything to do with like maths, like super like deep math stuff. Like I was terrible at it. I always had I always gravitated more towards, things that were more creative and like things that were more writing based as well. But I got into uni, I was like, oh, I think I'm really passionate about investment banking. But then when I got to that 6-month mark in uni, I was like, okay, that's probably not something I want to do because I met a few people in the industry, did a few courses in that. I started to question more about this quote unquote passion, like where does it really come from? And oftentimes when you're that age, like the two things are, one, it's like sunk cost. Like I'd studied basically from year 10 to year 12 to get myself like into a finance degree basically. I've done a bunch of extracurriculars that would help me get into investment banking. And there's just like a ton of sunk cost.
Yeah.
But then when I really questioned, like, why do I actually want to do this? A lot of it was actually just like extrinsic things, like not geared around fulfillment. Like a lot of it was just like, oh, like I love the money or I love the status and I love the prestige. And that's not at least for me, like not something that I wanted. Like I wanted to actually feel fulfilled in my work. Like I wanted to feel that my work was impactful. And at the end of the day, it's cool to say you work in investment banking, but then you're the one that actually, you get that 10 seconds of joy. But then it's for those 6 days in the week, it's you're the one that actually has to work that job like full time. No one's thinking about you. So it's you might as well, and you're going to be doing this for 40 years. And so it's for me back then, I was like, oh, I might as well spend a bit of time now just like actually questioning that and like pressure testing what is like a very practical decision. Do I enjoy doing this work? There are certain things that are just like, and I can touch on it, but there are certain things that are good skills, but are like terrible jobs. Like it's like a very like good skill to have, but like the best example is like people who are like really good at, I don't know, like baking. And so society tells them from you should follow your passions and turn that into like your work. They might go like start a bakery, or like they might go work as like a baker, or they might go work as like a dessert maker. But that's the skill set, and doing the job is like half of the thing. The other half of the thing is actually like learning like how to work in that role. It's what are the hours? Do those hours work with you? It's what are the type of people that you work with? Is that something that you're okay with? Like from a career progression standpoint, is it something that's actually fulfilling? But that's not related at all to like the skill set standpoint, right? And so when I was really like questioning a lot of those things, I think that's what sort of led me down the path from questioning that passion and stuff that uni just doesn't teach you this stuff, right? Because it's the whole time you're just learning about like theoretical things and like the on the job skill, but it's not teaching you like all the other stuff that's associated with like how to do the job. It's like with investment banking, it's do you know that there are really long hours? Are you okay with that? Do you know that from a career progression standpoint, it's going to be like a while before you can get like XYZ promotion that you want, or the people that you really look up to as well? And so there's a lot of things that like I think people don't think about, and I certainly wasn't thinking about it. And it's only something that I really realized like recently as well. But I would say, okay, if you feel as though you're very passionate about something and you've never worked in that role, go speak to people and just learn more about like that job full time as well. Yeah, a really good example is I thought a curiosity of mine, like I wouldn't say a passion, would be like trying to work in like the product management space. And I worked for 6 months in a role in product management. And I realized that it's a good skill, but for me, it was like a terrible job. Like I still use that skill of rapidly testing like different ideas, talking to customers, like learning about their needs and wants, building something like very quickly, learning from that and iterating. Like I still use those skills like every single day, and it's probably made me like a much better marketer as well. Yeah. But as a job, like for me, I like hated it because like you probably spend 20% of the time like actually doing all those things that I just spoke about and using the skill, and then 80% of your time is just like managing stakeholders, like in meetings, just like trying to build roadmaps. Like, I don't know, for some people, you might really enjoy that as like a job. But for me, like I need to be doing like executional things. Like I need to be doing things and seeing, okay, has this worked? Has this not worked? And so it's funny, like I always just end up coming back to marketing. Like I've gone into different forays in different fields, but I always just end up like coming back to marketing as like something that I think works from like a skill set standpoint, but also from a job standpoint. It's like something that I would say that now like I'm passionate about, but it didn't necessarily start that way.
I know you mentioned the pressure testing that you went through in order to find your passion. You did a lot of different roles like the door-to-door sales, all these different types of marketing roles. So what do you think has helped you be able to land, I guess, a lot of different roles in a relatively short amount of time? Because for a lot of people entering the job market now, whether they're in uni or straight out of uni, that's one of the bigger hurdles. So even if they do want to test out a lot of different things, it's actually getting into that position, getting someone to give them a job first. That is a big issue. Like, what do you suggest that people can do in order to actually land some of those different roles to try out what they may be interested in?
Yeah, I will like preface all of this advice by I think reflecting on my own personal position. Like I feel as though like I'm in like a pretty privileged position as well from like a career standpoint, where I was given a lot of time and space to find a lot of these things. Like for context, like I'm an only child. Like I live with both parents as well, have done so my whole life. Like I've never had to really worry. I didn't go to a private school or anything, but I've never had to worry about like money as like a big thing. And I've never had to like work odd jobs to help support my parents, which I know like a lot of people have to do. And I think that changes like your mindset in terms of like how you approach your career. And what I mean by that is, for instance, there's that trade-off of, I think when you start your career, it's either you like optimize for income, which in the short term is good, but doesn't really help you in the long term. Or you like optimize for skills and experiences, but the trade-off for that, which like has the long-term benefit of like more income, but the short-term trade-off is you don't get like immediate income off the back of that.
Yeah.
But my biggest piece of advice, and again, like caveating that, like from my position, like I've never had to really optimize for like short-term income as a thing. And if you are in that position, I think that's probably what this is most applicable for. I actually would just take whatever. Like I would just take whatever job as long as it's directionally something that you're curious about. And I think that from a financial standpoint, the first three jobs that I worked were all unpaid internships. The two of them, and then the other one was like a comms only role
Right.
as well, which is because I'm terrible at sales, so it was unpaid anyways.
Right.
But like I was in a very fortunate position, and I did that for probably 6 to 12 months. But I think that set like such a strong foundation because I was just like 19-year-old basically, and I'd already worked like three jobs. And then when I was applying for all these like entry level positions, people were like, wow, this person's already got some professional fundamentals. Like they've actually already done the role already as well in many sense. So like it's a no brainer to actually be able to land these roles. I think that's like really the main thing. Like I think well, especially if you don't know what you want to do, especially if you just don't know what to do, I would just actually take the step back and just assess, okay, what are you really optimizing like for at this current point in time? If you're in the fortunate enough position where money isn't like an immediate thing that you need to optimize for, realistically, like the only reason why you get paid or hired, regardless of entry level or non-entry level, is like skills. And so it's what are ways that you can develop those skills before you even apply for the role that you want that is like your quote unquote dream job as well. And so it's two ways. It's like one, you work as like an unpaid intern somewhere. It's part-time, like a bit more casual. You make sure you're very intentional with that experience as well. Like I wouldn't stay there for a year, like unpaid. And the second thing is look if you can just do some side projects or do different things that like just differentiate yourself from people at like university as well. So I'd say those are like the two sort of main things. But don't be like really picky. Don't be like super idealistic about I really like my first job has to be like my everything. Like truth of the matter is like your first job is most likely the one that you're not going to stay there for 40 years as well anymore. And so it's like you accept that, but once you get that first sort of rung on the ladder, once you get on that first rung on the ladder, it's like everything just becomes like a ton easier as well. And once you're in and around the industry too. So I'd say those are like the sort of two main ones. There's a bunch of other things, I think, in terms of helping land your first role. And if anyone listens to this, I think it really depends on the role in the industry that you want to end up in as well. And I would give varying advice for that. But yeah, like just think about ways you can differentiate yourself. Exhibiting skills and already doing the job before is something that's like very helpful as well. And it's like something that people don't do because the issue is uni teaches you to like, when someone says, tell me about yourself, if you're applying for an entry-level role, you've probably got 1,000 other grads that you're competing with. Uni teaches you to say, and you're like telling about yourself, hey, I'm like a third-year uni student. Mm-hmm. But also, guess what? 999 other people are going to be saying they graduated from uni as well. It's like the exact same thing. Yeah. And it's like interviewing people for entry-level roles. I can tell within the first 5 minutes whether or not I think this person is realistically like going to be like hired or not, like for that specific role as well. And it's just like it's basically just like how memorable. So there's like a bunch of different things within that. But I just look for ways to really differentiate yourself, stand out, to start getting some like experience on the board, whether that be starting your own thing, like working some like unpaid internships, and don't be like super picky if you are fortunate enough basically to be in that position. But like the first full-time job that I got, which was like a product marketing role, which was actually like a more junior to mid-level role, people that were applying for that were like grads straight out of uni. And we were all probably like 21, 22. But like I'd been working since 2019. Like I'd done 2 sales jobs. I'd worked in marketing and like a tech startup for like basically almost 2 years. And like that first like 3-4 months, I was like unpaid. Mm-hmm. And then at that tech startup job, like I basically built the whole like product marketing function like from scratch. And I just learned about that. And so when I applied for that role, it was like, this guy's already done the job, like relative to all these other candidates. And the way that he like talks about his experience isn't just like, hey, I'm just like a uni student. I'm really passionate about this. So you actually have exhibited some form of like passion there too.
Yeah. I think it's also the way you broke down for people applying for their first role. Yeah. Ways you can stand out. And just by mentioning what year you're in and what course you're doing, as you said, you're going to be sounding like hundreds to thousands of different people. So that's awesome advice. Going back to when you said the first few roles you had, the unpaid ones were actually really good ways for you to develop new skills. So I wanted to ask about those skills. Do you still use any of those things you've learned from those companies and the skills you developed during that time today while you're at early work? And yeah, just to give it a bit of context, could you also tell people a little bit more about early work and what you guys do?
Yeah, the interesting thing that I would say is actually it's like the two things that I was mentioning, right? It's like the two things that I was mentioning, and I'll provide a bit more context in early work. But in terms of doing a job and planning your career, it's like in a role, you have to assess two things. Everyone just, it's one is like the on the job and like the skill stuff. And the other one is like how to actually do the job well. And that's like everything that sort of is like around that too, and like understanding about whether or not that's something that like is okay. And I'll give you some examples of that. What most people think about is just like the on the job stuff. Honestly, from those first three jobs, like I wouldn't say I apply like a lot in terms of what I do right now. And that's just because, and that's fine. It's because I'm like working on a bunch of different problems. It requires like a different skill set for that. But in terms of like the how to work, as like a marketer or as someone who works within sales and like marketing, it's taught me a ton, right? It's how do I effectively go and like plan my week? Like, how do I actually go in and like plan my week? Like, it's even small things like, okay, going in like the night before, just like writing your to do list. It's almost like your professional fundamentals almost. It's okay, how do you run like meetings? How do you work with other people within this role? Those are things that like I carry over. And I think in a lot of uni grads, you just don't see that as well. And there's almost this like sense of entitlement that like, oh, because I have a degree, I can just get like whatever job like I want and I can just do whatever I want. But there's almost a thing of it's just a bit of like it's compromise at the end of the day. And so I carry a lot of those more like professional fundamentals, I would say, into what I do today as well as a bigger thing. But also it's like part of my story and it helps me to understand you don't know what good is until you know what like bad is.
Right.
And so in my job today, I really deeply understand that whilst the grass is always greener, I understand that it's okay to say that I actually love what I do and I love what I do for work. That's because I understand the bad of knocking on doors and phoning random people trying to sell memberships. And this is just so bad. This is terrible. And so I'd say I bring those sort of two main things into what I do today. A bit more regarding like the early work side. So basically we run like Australia's first tech sales school at the moment as well. Have a bit more of a storied background leading into that. But for brevity's sake, basically we started the tech sales school in late 2022 as well after running like a free tech and startup community and grew that to around 6,000 people before that, like 2 years prior. But basically since like late 2022, I've helped 150 plus people from uni grads, like career switches, break into the field of like software sales as well as another way of framing it. But yeah, it's exciting. Like we've got 8 people on the team as well. So exciting times overall, definitely grown up very quickly from when it was just the 4 of us when we first started. But yeah, exciting times. But I'd say I take a lot of that in as someone that's 23, just a lot of those like professional fundamentals, like knowing how to manage up, plan your week, those types of things. Like I took away like very invaluable skills that like I just didn't think I needed to know, but it's very important, like just knowing like how to work in your role, like effectively.
Yeah, that's really cool. And I know that when we did the Q&A, I introduced you as employee number one at early work, but I think you got some news for us today to discuss, and I'll let you explain it from here.
Yeah. Yeah. At the time of recording, it is somewhat fresh off the press, but by the time you listen to this, hopefully, if I've done my job well, you'll probably see it everywhere. But yeah, no, recently basically joined as like for the academy side of things, employee number one. And so when we're getting things off the ground, I remember my first week, the academy wasn't even like a thing yet as well. And it was just the 3 co-founders initially getting everything off the ground. And I was working with them in that first week just to run through a lot of user research, a lot of like ideation as well for what was out there. But as of something that's been in the works for the last few months, basically, was more formally actually like joining early work as a co-founder. And I was talking to Braith basically before this. It's something that was in the works and I was thinking about before I went overseas, obviously because there's the longer term commitment that is attached to that, moving up from an employee. But for me, it was just like I am very grateful that I can go to work and even wrapping up the holiday, etc., being like, wow, I can't actually wait to like go back to work almost. I know that's not a very fortunate position. I think that's a combination of the people that I work with, the sort of problem space that I work in around like careers and effectively helping people with their careers every day, like the education space, which is something that recently I feel as though direction I'm getting towards is more of like quote unquote thing, slash I'm just making that more and more my thing. And then also just like the skill set wise, being able to work in a fast growing startup is basically building out more of the marketing function as well is something that is like super interesting to me. Yeah, literally like for me, it was like a no brainer, like having been given the opportunity to. No, it's very exciting.
Yeah, congrats, man. And what's, I guess, some of the new things you'll be taking on now being part of the founding team?
Yeah, for me, it's not so much like a massive change. I think it's just layering on some extra responsibility as well. I think we've gotten to a pretty good point with the academy business at the moment that in future it's like looking at different expansion things, etc. And now just having more access effectively to those like higher level, because before I'd just be setting basically within the academy or like within the marketing side or like student acquisition, like that strategy. It's like being able to take away the level of abstraction and move like another level up almost and see from an actual business perspective. It's like, how do you plan different, like, how do you allocate resources effectively from a people side and like a human, like a people side and like a capital side? Like, how do you place bigger bets in the same sense as you do in like marketing almost? It's like, how do you place big bets for like marketing, but now it's like business wide impact. And I think for me, I've always loved just like starting things, like always building things, creating things as well. And to like have the opportunity to actually do that with a business from 0 to 1 that is like working really well is like pretty rare opportunity as well too. So yeah, just usurping a bit more like responsibility, being able to shape more of like overall like business direction as opposed to basically just the little bit that I owned as like an employee is exciting.
Yeah, yeah, really exciting and really keen to see everything that comes from it soon. Now, in the Q&A, one of the quotes that I pulled from it that you said was, people should chase what they're curious about and the right people at a similar stage in life will appear. So could you speak on some of the people that came into your life when you leaned more fearlessly into your own curiosities, how that process was getting over the fear of caring what other people think, and what that impact has been on you?
Oh man, I'll give an excellent example that's very related back to what we were just talking about.
Yeah.
In terms of that experience, I think I probably had it a little bit easier because when I was in 2019, first uni, like I think I was just really following along, which is like what everyone else was doing, wanting to work in corporate, that type of thing. And funnily enough, I think the COVID was something that definitely helped in terms of easing that transition into just being like more self-critical thinking about things. Cause like I was just by my home, like at home by myself. So I didn't have to think about anyone else really, as everyone's just doing their own thing as well too. And beyond that, I think I've always been someone that has just like always been relatively independent and slash like contrarian deep down in the way that I like to think about things. So
Yeah.
that was like a little thing, but I think I just strayed away from that when I went to my later years of like high school and early year of uni as well. But where this story all comes back is one thing that I was super curious about, and this is in the middle of COVID. So this is like back end to like middle, late 2020. I was working in like a marketing job at Law Park, which was like actually unpaid for the first 2 months. But at this point, I was like 1 day, like 2 day a week, like paid as well. And I was actually really curious about actually just marketing as like a career because in the past, I'd actually had my own YouTube channel. Like I create a lot of content for it, but funny enough, I never thought about it as like a job. And so I was really curious about, like, okay, is this marketing thing actually something that like I can do as a longer term career? And funny enough, like very similar to yourself, Braith, I had the idea of I really want to meet new people. That are within the industry, but I just want to be like a random like uni kid just like reaching out for like coffee or like a random first year or second year uni kid reaching out for coffee. I was like, I've always been interested actually more in like the content creation space and building out more chops in that. And so I was like, okay, why don't I start like a podcast that combines like the two of them? It lets me hone in more on the video editing side and like the social media content creation side, whilst also meeting people within the industry and meeting them. And so I chased that curiosity down, started the podcast, and that eventually grew to a newsletter, like a website. But that's also because I was just curious about one, starting a newsletter, but two, also building a website. But that's like a separate thing. For the podcast specifically, back in late 2020, so there was a guy called Dan Brockwell who, funnily enough, like a few months earlier than me, had started a newsletter called Earlywork. And it was helping people find like careers in tech, helping people learn more about careers in tech. And I was like on LinkedIn one day, and I was like 1 or 2 episodes into this podcast, and I was like, fuck, I just keep seeing this guy like everywhere on my LinkedIn. Like I just keep seeing him everywhere. Like this is ridiculous. Like never spoken to him before. I think I had one mutual connection or something with him. I was like, why don't I just reach out to him and let's just actually just want to see, he seems like pretty young. Let me just reach out to him and just see if I can get some tips for how to grow like a media brand, because he was doing a similar thing. And so I remember the first call that I had with him, I think he was like in his backyard or something, and we were just like talking, and I was like, oh, this is like pretty cool actually. And I didn't think too much about it after the call finished, just kept plodding along as well. And then we used to just keep, I don't know, just like running into each other at like different events as well. Eventually we like caught up like another time as well, where we just like actually got to like in person, got to know each other a little bit better. And I like to think, I think looking back on that, that experience was effectively like what got me hired at Earlywork and got me the opportunity of now basically being more formally like a co-founder of Earlywork, which I never previously, or even just being a co-founder in general of like an education business was like not something that I thought of. But it was only because I had reached out to Dan back in 2020 because I was really just curious about like one, podcasting, how to grow a brand, but also curious about meeting other people within the space. I think I reached out to him, and then naturally it's like really just serendipitous, I guess, and like how this all works. So just like seeing each other like a bit more regularly, started to get to know each other a bit more as well, and was like basically just like on his radar effectively there. And like effectively the last almost 2 years now would not have been, if I didn't send that LinkedIn message, like that LinkedIn DM, or like if I didn't start that podcast and just enact on what I was really curious about, it's Dan as like a person wouldn't have like really came into my life. But also like Earlywork as like a job opportunity, like definitely would not have as well, because the role that I was hired for, they didn't even list publicly. It was just like a message. It was like, hey, look, we're like hiring for this. What are your thoughts? You want to come interview, right? So that's like a very good immediate example. There are a bunch of other people in the outside of work sense as well who do that. But I think the general thing is like just being very okay and accepting that like at the end of the day, like you really only need in life 4 to 5 like really good friends. And if you are doing something, you are like by association, you will start meeting people who are doing the same thing. And that's also what I like about travel too. But by doing certain activities, it attracts like people that have the same, like certain values and certain mindset. And like to build those really long-term friendships and long-term relationships, like you need to share similar values with these people. And so what I really like about traveling or like doing things with creating content is like normally if you're creating content or like normally if you're like traveling a lot, like you're pretty open-minded to things, such like you like trying out new things, like you like doing a lot of different things. And those are the people that I really like interacting with. And so you almost, once you start doing the habits that like you really enjoy doing, you'll find other people who like really enjoy doing them too. But as a byproduct, it's like normally 9 times out of 10, if someone's doing those same things as you, like you'll probably get along with them.
I love that. Such a cool story, bro. Shout out, Dan. And funny thing is, it was actually my first guest on my blog, like the written blog where I did the me biographies. And through Dan and Earlywork is how I met you.
Yeah.
It's so cool. And having you here now on the podcast it's just awesome. Just being conscious of time, I have 2 to 3 questions. Do you want to just do 2 more?
Yeah, man. Yeah, happy to go with that, bro.
Okay. So these are 2 questions that I ask basically everyone on the podcast. So the first one, if you had to live your life following the words of one single quote, what would it be?
Oh, mate, you already know what this is going to be. But yeah, it's like embrace uncertainty and follow curiosity.
Yeah, love that. And this could be similar, but this one is a bit more outward. If you could reach everyone in the world for 30 seconds, so you have to speak for a little bit more than the previous one, what would you say?
My inner marketer is saying that you probably want to niche it down a bit more and say something that really relates to those people versus just preaching to the choir. But I guess if you have everyone, you just got to preach to the choir, and naturally the people that resonate with the message will follow it. Yeah, I think my biggest thing is just I read this like recent quote, and I started off with this. Like I read this recent quote / like I forget who it's from, but it was like being an adult isn't moving out of home, isn't buying a house, isn't starting a family. Being an adult is you are okay, like you actually are making decisions like for yourself. Like being an adult is like actually accepting. It's like very similar thing to embracing that curiosity and like embracing the uncertainty that you have. It's like being very okay. It's like some people will get to 50 years of age. And I think where you go wrong is you reflect back and I just did all these things, or like I did nothing that actually makes me personally like fulfilled. I don't think enough people actually question and ask themselves, what makes me personally fulfilled? Not my friends, not my family. What actually makes me fulfilled, and then live a life like according to that, not just like following other people's. And on my soapbox, like I would say, take the time. It doesn't matter like what age you are, to actually just reflect more on your past, and will reflect more on things that like really just give you a lot of energy, and start just like making a lot more decisions for yourself as well that aren't based on like society's expectations, what your friends are doing, what your family wants to do. Make that decision for yourself because it's like your life.
Love that. Love that. That's awesome. Yeah, before we finish up, is there anything or anywhere that you want to direct audiences? I can just put it in the show notes for them to find.
Two things. One of them is obviously the Earlywork website, where you'll be able to find it a bit more. And by the time that this podcast goes out, there'll be another thing that Ben and I are basically starting on the side from Earlywork as well. But I guess it all kind of forms into one big ecosystem anyways, called the D.I.P. Basically, it'll be like a repository website talking about everything to do with like business careers in tech. And we're going to get people on that are working in customer success, people that are working in marketing, people working in business development, people working in operations, to come in and to do like the more interactive, very like Gen Z style videos effectively, to explain like their day in the life in that role. What does career progression look like? What does salary look like? And so that's a completely free resource, and like a newsletter coming with that. Yeah, if I get to it, that'll be live by the time this podcast is out. I can flick both the link for everyone to check out there too.
Yeah, awesome, awesome. I'll share that with everyone. One last thing I wanted to try and the guest isn't going to know this, but I wanted you to come up with a question, like any question you want, and I'm just going to ask that to the next guest.
Anyways, I just be a bit of a dick, but no, I have a good one. Are you right now, like for where you are you where you thought you would be 5 years ago?
Okay. All right. Nice. I'll ask them then. And well, Ryan, thank you so much. It was awesome to have you on. And yeah, I'm really excited for once this is live, the other news will also be live, and excited to see everything that comes from the new co-founder role. So congrats on that. And yeah, thanks for coming on the podcast.
Legend. Thanks for having me.